The scream came from the great hall before Elena Marsh even opened her eyes. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, and knew without being told that something had shattered. She pulled on a robe and ran down the stone corridor of the Blackthorn pack house, following the sound of raised voices. When she reached the hall, she saw Damien Cross standing at the center of a circle of pack members, and beside him, holding his arm like a trophy, stood her stepsister, Vivian Cole. "Tell them," Vivian said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Tell them what you told me last night, Damien." Damien's jaw was tight. He looked at Elena across the room, and for one terrible second, something like guilt flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the hard, controlled expression of an alpha who had already made his decision. "Elena," he said, "I think it's best if we end things between us." The room went silent. Elena felt the eyes of the entire pack turn to her, waiting to see her break. She would not give them that. She lifted her chin, and even though her chest felt like it was caving in, she kept her voice steady. "If that is your decision, Damien, then I respect it." Vivian's smile was small and satisfied, hidden from everyone but Elena. Only the two of them understood what had truly happened in the past few weeks. Vivian had moved into the pack house under the excuse of being closer to family after her mother married Elena's father. She had watched Elena and Damien together, had studied the way Damien looked at Elena, had studied his habits, his weaknesses, the exact words that made him feel important. And then, slowly, carefully, she had taken all of it and turned it against her own stepsister. Elena did not know all the details yet. She did not know about the private messages Vivian had sent Damien, claiming Elena had been unfaithful with a neighboring Pax Beta. She did not know about the tears Vivian had cried in front of Damien, tears that were entirely for show. All Elena knew was that the boy she loved, the alpha she had grown up beside since she was 12 years old, was now standing in front of the whole pack, holding another woman's hand, and that woman was her stepsister. Elena turned and walked out of the hall without another word. Behind her, she heard whispers begin, the kind of whispers that would spread through the pack by morning. The stepsister who lost her alpha, the girl who wasn't good enough to keep him. She let them talk. She had learned long ago that showing pain only made people hungrier for more of it. She reached her room and closed the door, and only then did she allow her hands to shake. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall, replaying the last few weeks in her mind. The way Vivian had suddenly started joining Damien on his morning runs. The way Vivian had begun sitting in on pack council meetings she had no right to attend. The way Damien had grown distant, distracted, apologetic in a way that made no sense unless someone was feeding him lies. It all made sense now. Vivian had not fallen in love with Damien. Vivian had studied him the way a hunter studies a trail. And Elena had been too trusting, too busy loving him honestly, to see the trap being built around her. A knock came at her door. It was her father, Richard Marsh, his face full of worry. "Elena, I heard what happened. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Dad," she said, and she made her voice sound calm, almost bored, as if the whole thing barely mattered. Damien made his choice. People do that. Richard studied her for a long moment. He knew his daughter well enough to know when she was hiding something, but he also knew better than to push. "Diane feels terrible about this," he said, referring to his new wife, Vivian's mother. She had no idea Vivian felt this way about Damien. Elena almost laughed. Diane knew exactly what her daughter was capable of. She just chose not to see it, the same way she chose not to see many things about Vivian. But Elena said nothing. There was no point arguing with a man who wanted to believe the best about his new family. "I need some rest," Elena said instead. "I'll be fine in the morning." Her father left, and Elena sat alone in the dark for a long time. She thought about crying. She thought about screaming into her pillow, the way she had when she was younger, and the world felt unfair. But something in her had changed the moment she watched Vivian smile at her across that hall. The sadness was still there, buried deep, but on top of it, something colder and sharper had begun to grow. Elena did not want revenge in the way people usually meant it. She did not want to shout, to fight, to make a scene that would only prove to the pack that she was exactly the emotional, wounded girl they expected her to be. She wanted something better. She wanted the truth to come out on its own, in front of everyone, in a way that Vivian could never explain away. She would need patience. She would need to become someone the pack trusted completely, someone whose calm strength stood in sharp contrast to whatever chaos Vivian would eventually create, because Elena knew her stepsister well enough to know that Vivian was not built for steady happiness. Vivian needed attention, control, admiration. She would not be satisfied simply winning Damien. She would need to keep winning, again and again, and eventually, that hunger would show itself. Over the following days, Elena did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She began attending every pack council meeting she was allowed to attend, sitting quietly in the back, listening to every discussion about territory boundaries, trade agreements, and pack law. She had always been intelligent, but she had spent most of her energy on being kind, being supportive, being the steady presence beside Damien, rather than a force in her own right. Now, without him, she had time, and she used it. She spoke to Grace Whitfield, an older pack member who had served on the council for over a decade, and asked to learn more about the history of alpha succession within Blackthorn law. Grace, surprised but pleased by Elena's sudden interest, began teaching her in the evenings, explaining the ancient rules that governed how an alpha could rise, fall, or be challenged. "Most young wolves don't care about any of this," Grace said one evening, as they sat together with old books spread across the table. "They think love and loyalty are enough to hold a pack together, but law is what protects a pack when love fails." Elena absorbed every word. She learned that an alpha's chosen mate held real power within the pack, not just social standing but actual influence over decisions, resources, and alliances. She learned that if a future Luna acted against the pack's best interests, there were mechanisms, old and rarely used, that could remove her from that position entirely. She learned that trust, once broken publicly and undeniably, could not be repaired with apologies alone. Vivian, meanwhile, was enjoying her new status. She walked through the pack house with her head high, accepting compliments about her engagement to Damien, ordering changes to the decor of rooms that were not yet hers to control. She hired new staff for events without consulting the council. She began making small decisions about pack matters, testing how far her new position would let her go, and each time no one stopped her, her confidence grew a little more reckless. Elena watched all of this from a careful distance, never confronting Vivian, never showing anger. In fact, she went out of her way to be pleasant whenever they crossed paths. "Congratulations again," Elena said one afternoon, when she passed Vivian in the garden. "I hope you and Damien will be very happy." Vivian tilted her head, studying Elena's face for any crack in the calm surface. She found none. "You're taking this better than I expected," Vivian said, a note of suspicion in her voice. "What else can I do?" Elena said with a small shrug. "Damien made his choice. I'm not going to spend my life bitter over something I can't change." It was, in a strange way, the truth. Elena was not planning to spend her life bitter. She was planning something far more patient and far more precise than bitterness could ever accomplish. That evening, Elena received a message from an unexpected source. Marcus Hale, beta of the neighboring Ashford pack, requested a meeting. Elena had met Marcus a handful of times over the years, mostly at pack gatherings and trade negotiations. He was sharp, guarded, and known for holding old grudges against Damien, though the exact reason was never spoken about openly among Blackthorn wolves. They met at a quiet cafe on neutral ground, between the two territories. Marcus arrived first, sitting in a corner booth where he could watch the door, a habit Elena recognized because she had recently started doing the same thing herself. "I heard about what happened," Marcus said, once she sat down. "The whole territory has heard about it, actually. Alpha Cross is not exactly known for keeping his personal affairs private." "I didn't come here to talk about my personal affairs," Elena said evenly. "No," Marcus agreed, leaning back. "You came here because you're smart enough to know that Damien Cross has enemies, and you're wondering if I might be one of them." Elena said nothing, waiting. "I am," Marcus continued. "Not for the reasons you might think. This isn't about jealousy or old rivalries between packs. Damien broke an agreement with my pack 3 years ago, an agreement that cost us good land and good wolves. He apologized publicly and privately, and everyone moved on, but I never forgot. I don't forgive broken agreements easily." And you think I want to help you get revenge on him, Elena said. I think, Marcus said carefully, that you and I want very different things from very similar situations. I don't care who sits beside Damien Cross as his mate. I care about making sure he remembers what it cost to break trust. If your stepsister happens to be the reason his trust becomes worth breaking, well, that's simply useful timing. Elena considered this for a long moment. She did not fully trust Marcus, and she suspected he did not fully trust her either. But trust was not what she needed from him. She needed information and connections, and someone outside the Blackthorn pack who could see things she could not see from inside. I'm not interested in destroying Damien, Elena finally said. I loved him once, and some part of me still respects what he's built here. I'm interested in the truth. If the truth destroys anything, that will not be because of me. Marcus studied her, something like respect crossing his sharp features. That's a careful way of saying yes. It's an honest way of saying yes, Elena corrected. There's a difference. They spoke for another hour, carefully, testing each other's boundaries, sharing small pieces of information without giving away too much. Marcus mentioned that he had heard rumors of tension building along a disputed border between Blackthorn and a smaller neighboring territory, a dispute that would likely require a decision from the future Luna in the coming months, since Damien had recently begun delegating certain territorial matters to Vivian as part of her transition into pack leadership. Elena filed this information away carefully. A border dispute, a decision that would require judgment, patience, and genuine care for the well-being of pack members on both sides. It was exactly the kind of situation where someone like Vivian, someone who cared more about appearances than substance, might make a mistake large enough for everyone to see. Elena did not create the dispute. She did not create Vivian's flaws. She simply understood, with the clear eyes of someone who had loved and lost and refused to be broken by it, that if she was patient enough, the truth would eventually build its own trap, and all she needed to do was make sure everyone was watching when it finally closed. Walking home that night, Elena passed by the training grounds where Damien was finishing a session with several younger pack members. He caught sight of her, and, for a brief moment, their eyes met across the open field. There was something searching in his expression, something almost like doubt, but Elena did not slow her steps. She offered him a polite nod, the kind she might give any pack alpha, and continued walking. She would not chase him. She would not beg for explanations, or fight for a place beside him that Vivian had stolen through lies. If Damien ever came to understand the truth of what had happened, he would need to arrive there on his own, guided only by what he saw with his own eyes. Back in her room, Elena opened the notebook she had begun keeping, filled with notes on pack law, observations about Vivian's growing carelessness, and small details from her conversation with Marcus. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote a single sentence, one that would guide everything she did in the weeks to come. Patience is not weakness. Patience is the sharpest weapon of all. She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and for the first time since the humiliation in the Great Hall, Elena Marsh slept peacefully, because for the first time, she had a plan. The following morning, Elena woke early and dressed carefully, choosing a simple, elegant outfit that made her look composed rather than desperate for attention. She had learned, in just a few short days, that image mattered as much as substance within the pack, and if she wanted people to trust her judgment later, she needed to start building that trust now, quietly and consistently. She spent the morning with Grace, continuing her study of pack law, focusing specifically on the rules surrounding territorial disputes and the responsibilities of a future Luna in resolving them fairly. Grace, sensing Elena's genuine interest, began sharing stories of past disputes, cautionary tales of Lunas who had failed their people through carelessness or selfishness, and the consequences that followed. There was a Luna once, generations ago, Grace said, turning the pages of an old leather book, who favored her own family's interests over a fair resolution during a land dispute. The pack she wronged never forgot it. Decades later, when her mate's leadership weakened, that old wound became the crack that brought down his entire rule. Elena listened closely, understanding the deeper lesson beneath the history lesson. A pack's memory was long. A single unfair decision, made carelessly and without genuine concern for the people affected, could echo for years. waiting for the right moment to matter again. She spent the afternoon walking the disputed border herself, without telling anyone where she was going. She spoke quietly, with a few of the pack members living near the boundary, listening to their concerns, their fears about losing grazing land that had belonged to their families for generations. She did not offer promises or solutions. She simply listened, and in listening, she learned exactly what kind of decision this situation truly required: patience, fairness, and a willingness to sacrifice convenience for the sake of doing right by everyone involved. It was, Elena realized, exactly the kind of decision Vivian would struggle to make well. That evening, as the sun set over the Blackthorn territory, Elena stood on the balcony outside her room and looked out over the land she had grown up loving, the land she had once imagined ruling beside Damien. That dream was gone now, taken from her through lies and manipulation, but a new understanding had taken its place, quieter and more powerful than any dream of romance. Elena understood, perhaps for the first time in her life, that her own strength did not depend on being chosen by anyone. It depended only on what she chose to build with her own hands, her own patience, and her own unshakable sense of what was right. Somewhere across the pack house, Vivian was likely celebrating another small victory, another compliment, another moment of borrowed power that meant nothing without real substance behind it. Elena did not envy her. She simply waited, calm and certain, knowing that every choice Vivian made without wisdom was one more thread in a trap that Vivian herself did not know she was walking into. The night grew dark, the stars appeared over the Blackthorn Hills, and Elena Marsh, once humiliated in front of her entire pack, closed her eyes with a steady, quiet resolve that no one around her yet understood. She was no longer simply the stepsister who had lost her alpha. She was becoming something far more dangerous and far more patient than anyone in that great hall could have imagined. Days turned into a careful rhythm. Elena rose early, studied pack law with Grace in the mornings, walked the territory in the afternoons, listening and learning, and in the evenings she wrote in her notebook, tracking every small mistake Vivian made, every decision that revealed more about her true character than her carefully practiced smiles ever could. Vivian, for her part, remained blissfully unaware that anyone was watching her so closely. She continued making decisions based on convenience and appearance rather than fairness and wisdom, continued alienating pack members who had once respected the quiet dignity Elena had always shown, and continued believing that stealing Damien's heart had been her greatest and final victory. She had no idea that Elena was not defeated. She had no idea that somewhere in the quiet corners of the pack house, a far more careful, far more intelligent plan was already taking shape. One built not on jealousy or anger, but on patience, truth, and the unshakable belief that real strength always outlasts stolen power. The morning sun had barely risen when Elena heard the first argument coming from the east wing of the pack house. She recognized Vivian's voice immediately, sharp and impatient, scolding one of the household staff over a mistake with the seating arrangements for an upcoming pack gathering. Elena paused outside the door, listening without meaning to, and felt something settle inside her, a quiet confirmation that the woman Damien had chosen was not becoming kinder or more capable with power. She was becoming exactly what Elena suspected she had always been, underneath the practiced charm. Elena did not intervene. She continued down the hallway, greeting the staff member kindly once Vivian had stormed off, offering a few quiet words of reassurance before moving on with her day. Small moments like this were becoming a pattern, one Elena noticed the pack members beginning to notice as well. Where Vivian left frustration and tension behind her, Elena left calm and reassurance. It was not a strategy she had planned in detail, only a natural extension of who she had always been, but she understood now how valuable that quiet difference could become. Grace found her in the study later that morning, surrounded by open books on pack governance. "You've become quite the scholar," Grace said, setting down a tray of tea. "Most wolves your age would rather be anywhere else than buried in these old texts." "I like understanding how things work," Elena said simply. "Especially the things that decide who leads us and why." Grace studied her for a long moment, the way an old wolf studies a young one she suspects is capable of more than she lets on. "There's a council meeting this afternoon," Grace said, "about the border dispute near Hollow Creek. Vivian has been asked to attend and offer her opinion, since Alpha Cross wants her more involved in territorial matters before the wedding. Elena's pulse quickened slightly, though her expression remained unchanged. I didn't realize the wedding date had been set. 6 weeks from now, Grace said, watching Elena carefully for any reaction. I'm sorry if that's difficult to hear. It's not difficult, Elena said, and to her own surprise, she meant it. The wedding no longer felt like the center of her world. It felt like a deadline, a fixed point on a calendar that gave her plan a clear shape and urgency. 6 weeks. She had 6 weeks to make sure the truth came out, before Vivian's lies became permanently woven into the pack's future. That afternoon, Elena found a quiet reason to be near the council chamber when the meeting about Hollow Creek began. She was not invited to attend, but she positioned herself in the adjoining library, close enough to hear voices through the thin wall separating the two rooms, a trick she had learned from Grace, who mentioned once that the old pack house had never been built with much attention to soundproofing between important rooms. Damien's voice was calm and measured as he explained the situation to the council. The Hollow Creek families, longtime residents along the disputed boundary, had petitioned for continued access to grazing land that a neighboring pack now claimed belonged to them following a recent survey. The dispute was delicate, requiring careful negotiation and a decision that balanced fairness with practicality. Vivian, Damien said, since you'll be taking on more responsibility for matters like this, I want your thoughts. There was a pause, and Elena could almost picture Vivian straightening in her seat, eager to impress. I think, Vivian said, we should simply enforce our claim to the land. We have the survey results supporting our position. Why complicate things by giving anything away? A council member, an older wolf named Nathan Pierce, spoke up carefully. With respect, the survey results are disputed by the other pack, and the families who have farmed that land for 3 generations will suffer greatly if we take a hard stance. There may be a compromise available, splitting the disputed section fairly. Compromise makes us look weak, Vivian said, her voice hardening. If we give an inch here, other packs will think Blackthorn can be pushed around. Elena listened, unsurprised but quietly cataloging every word. Vivian's instinct was to protect appearances and project strength, without any real understanding of the human cost behind the decision. It was exactly the kind of short-sighted thinking Grace had warned her about, the kind that created wounds lasting generations. Damien, to his credit, did not immediately agree with Vivian. I want more information before we decide anything, he said. This isn't a decision to make quickly. The meeting continued for another hour, but Elena had heard enough. Vivian's instincts leaned toward pride and control rather than fairness, exactly as Elena had suspected. The dispute was not yet resolved, which meant there was still time, still opportunity for that instinct to fully reveal itself in a way the entire council would witness and remember. That evening, Elena visited Marcus again, this time at a small inn near the border between their territories. She shared what she had overheard, careful not to reveal how closely she was monitoring events inside her own pack. Interesting, Marcus said, leaning forward. The Hollow Creek dispute has been quiet for years. Someone must have stirred it up again recently. Do you know who initiated the new survey? Elena asked. Marcus thought for a moment. I believe it was requested by a smaller pack to the north, the Ridgemont pack. They're ambitious, always looking to expand their influence. If Blackthorn handles this poorly, Ridgemont could use it to make Damien look unreasonable to other territories, weakening his standing before his own wedding even happens. Elena absorbed this new piece of information carefully. The dispute was not simply a local land issue. It was a delicate situation, with wider consequences for Damien's reputation and Blackthorn's standing among neighboring packs. If Vivian pushed for an aggressive, prideful response, and Damien allowed it because he trusted her judgment, the fallout could be significant and very public. I'm not going to manipulate the outcome of this dispute, Elena said firmly, wanting to be clear about her boundaries. I won't put innocent families at risk to prove a point about my stepsister's character. I wouldn't expect you to, Marcus said, and there was something almost like respect in his voice. But you don't need to manipulate anything. From what you've described, Vivian is going to make her own mistakes. You just need to make sure the right people are watching when she does. Elena nodded slowly. That was exactly her intention, nothing more and nothing less. Over the following days, Elena made a point of befriending Nathan Pierce, the older council member who had spoken up in favor of compromise. She visited him under the pretense of continuing her education in pack law, but their conversations naturally drifted toward the Hollow Creek situation, and Elena listened carefully as Nathan explained the deep roots the farming families had in that land, roots that predated even the current territorial boundaries. My grandmother used to say that land disputes are never really about land, Nathan told her one afternoon, as they sat together in the garden. They're about whether the people in power actually see the people they're supposed to protect. Elena carried that thought with her for days afterward. It clarified something important about the kind of leader she wanted to become, not through calculation or strategy alone, but through genuine belief. She did not want power because she craved control the way Vivian did. She wanted the chance to lead with the kind of care Nathan's grandmother had described, care that saw people clearly and valued them beyond their usefulness. Meanwhile, Vivian's confidence continued to grow unchecked. She began hosting small gatherings of her own, inviting only pack members she considered important or useful, quietly excluding others, in a way that created visible tension within the community. She redecorated portions of the pack house without asking the council, spending resources on personal comfort, while claiming the changes were for the benefit of pack morale. Small complaints began reaching Grace and other senior council members, though no one yet felt bold enough to challenge Vivian directly, given her closeness to Damien. Elena heard about these complaints indirectly, through conversations with staff members who trusted her, through Grace's careful mentions during their lessons, through the general undercurrent of unease that was slowly building throughout the pack house. She did nothing to encourage the complaints or spread them further. She simply listened, understanding that the pack's patience with Vivian was a limited resource, one that would eventually run out entirely on its own. 3 weeks after the engagement had been announced, Damien called Elena to his study, the first private conversation they had shared since the humiliation in the Great Hall. Elena entered cautiously, unsure what to expect, keeping her expression calm and neutral. "I wanted to talk to you," Damien said, standing near the window, his back partially turned toward her. "About how things ended between us." "There's nothing to discuss, Damien," Elena said evenly. "You made your choice. I've accepted it." He turned to face her, and for a moment, the careful mask of alpha authority slipped, revealing something more uncertain underneath. "Have you? Because you seem different lately. Stronger, somehow. I can't quite explain it." Elena met his gaze steadily. "People change, especially after they lose something they valued. I'm simply learning to stand on my own." Damien studied her for a long moment, and Elena could see him wrestling with something he didn't fully understand himself. "Vivian mentioned you've been spending a lot of time with Grace, studying pack law." "Why?" "Because knowledge is valuable," Elena said simply. "And because I intend to remain useful to this pack, regardless of my personal circumstances." Something in her answer seemed to unsettle him, though he said nothing more about it. Instead, he shifted the conversation toward the upcoming Hollow Creek decision, mentioning, almost casually, that he valued outside perspectives and asking if Elena had any thoughts on the matter, given her recent studies. Elena chose her words carefully. "I think any decision involving people's homes and livelihoods deserves patience and fairness, not speed or pride. The families living there have generations of history tied to that land. Whatever decision Blackthorn makes will be remembered for a very long time, for better or worse." Damien nodded slowly, something thoughtful crossing his expression. "That's wise advice." "It's simply the truth," Elena said. "Sometimes the truth is enough on its own." She left his study soon after, her heart steady, despite the strange mixture of emotions the conversation had stirred within her. She had not tried to influence him against Vivian directly, had not spoken a single unkind word about her stepsister, and yet, she had planted, quietly and honestly, a seed of doubt about whether Vivian's judgment could be trusted with something as important as the Hollow Creek decision. That night, writing in her notebook, Elena considered how far she had come in just a few short weeks. She was no longer the heartbroken girl standing silently in the Great Hall, absorbing humiliation without protest. She was becoming someone the pack trusted, someone whose calm wisdom stood in growing contrast to Vivian's careless ambition. The trap she was building required no lies, no manipulation, no cruelty of her own. It required only patience and the simple, unshakable truth of who she really was. Outside her window, the moon hung full and bright over the Blackthorn territory, and somewhere beyond the hills, the Hollow Creek families waited anxiously for a decision that would shape their futures. Elena closed her notebook, extinguished the light, and allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, a small, private smile. The trap was closing slowly, one honest choice at a time, and Vivian did not even know it existed. The council chamber was full for the second Hollow Creek meeting, more crowded than usual because word had spread that a decision was finally approaching. Elena was not permitted inside, but she no longer needed to eavesdrop through library walls. Nathan Pierce had begun sharing details with her openly, trusting her judgment enough to treat her almost as an unofficial advisor, even though she held no formal position within the council. Vivian pushed hard for the aggressive approach again, Nathan told Elena afterward, as they walked together through the garden. She wants Blackthorn to claim the entire disputed section, using the survey as justification, and offer nothing to the Hollow Creek families or the Ridgemont pack. What did Damien decide? Elena asked. Nothing yet, Nathan said, shaking his head. He's torn. Part of him wants to trust Vivian's judgment, especially since she'll be his Luna soon, but part of him clearly has doubts. He asked the council for one more week before finalizing anything. One more week. Elena turned the information over carefully in her mind. Whatever happened during that week would likely determine the shape of everything that followed. She needed the Hollow Creek family's voices to be heard clearly, not filtered through Vivian's prideful interpretation of the situation, but she needed this to happen naturally, without any appearance of her own interference. That evening, Elena visited the small farming community near Hollow Creek herself, dressed simply, introducing herself only as a concerned member of the Blackthorn pack, rather than revealing her personal history with Damien or Vivian. She spoke with an elderly farmer named Walter Higgins, whose family had worked the disputed land for 4 generations. They keep talking about surveys and boundaries, Walter said, his voice heavy with worry, but nobody's asked us what this land means to our families. My grandfather is buried on that hill. My children learned to walk in that field. It isn't just dirt to us. Elena listened, and something in her chest tightened with genuine sympathy, not calculated but real. She asked Walter if he and the other families would be willing to share their stories directly with the council, to put human faces and real history behind the abstract lines drawn on survey maps. Would they even listen? Walter asked skeptically. Powerful wolves rarely listen to farmers. They should, Elena said firmly, and I believe some of them will, if given the chance. She returned to the pack house that night and spoke quietly with Nathan, suggesting, without revealing her own visit to Hollow Creek, that the council invite representatives from the farming families to share their perspective directly before any final decision was made. Nathan agreed it was a reasonable and fair suggestion, one that reflected well on Blackthorn's commitment to justice, and he proposed the idea to Damien the following morning. Damien agreed readily, seeing the wisdom in hearing directly from those affected. Vivian, however, was visibly displeased when she learned of the plan. Why complicate this further? She said during a private conversation with Damien that Elena later heard about through Grace. We already have the survey. Inviting a bunch of emotional farmers to cry in front of the council will only slow things down and make us look uncertain. Damien, according to Grace, had firmly disagreed. Justice sometimes requires patience, Vivian. I want to hear from the people this decision actually affects. The meeting took place 3 days later. Walter Higgins and 2 other Hollow Creek residents stood before the council, speaking honestly about their family's history on the land, about the hardship losing access to it would cause, about the deep, generational connection between their community and the disputed territory. Several council members, including Damien himself, were visibly moved. Vivian sat beside Damien throughout the meeting, her expression carefully neutral, but Elena, watching from the back of the chamber where she had finally been permitted to observe as an interested pack member, noticed the subtle tightening around Vivian's eyes, the barely concealed impatience as the farmers spoke. When the farmers finished, Vivian spoke up immediately. "I understand this is difficult," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "But sentiment cannot override practical territorial claims. We have a responsibility to protect Blackthorn's interests first." Her words, though carefully chosen, landed coldly in a room that had just been moved by genuine human stories. Several council members exchanged uneasy glances. Even Damien's expression grew troubled. "There must be a way to honor both practical claims and the history of these families," Nathan said carefully, breaking the tense silence. "A compromise splitting the disputed section, allowing continued grazing access while formally recognizing updated boundaries, could satisfy both concerns." Vivian's jaw tightened, but she said nothing further, sensing the room had turned against her aggressive stance. Damien, after a long moment of consideration, nodded slowly. "I think that's the wisest path forward," he said. "We'll pursue the compromise Nathan suggested." The meeting ended, and as the council members filed out, Elena caught snippets of quiet conversation, murmurs of approval for the fair decision, and quieter murmurs of concern about Vivian's cold response to the farmer's genuine hardship. It was not the dramatic exposure Elena had originally imagined when she began her careful plan, but it was something arguably more valuable, a small, real crack in the pack's confidence in Vivian's judgment and character. Later that evening, Elena found Damien standing alone near the training grounds, staring out over the darkening territory with a troubled expression. "You did the right thing today," Elena said, approaching cautiously. Damien glanced at her, surprised. "You heard about the meeting?" "I was there," Elena admitted, "in the back." He nodded slowly, something unreadable in his eyes. "Vivian was upset with me afterward. She thinks I undermined her authority by siding with the compromise." "Did you undermine her authority?" Elena asked carefully. "Or did you simply make the right decision for the pack?" Damien was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "Lately, it feels like every decision Vivian pushes for is about strength and appearances, and every decision that actually helps people requires convincing her otherwise. That worries me, Elena. Aluna is supposed to care about our people as much as I do." Elena felt her heart quicken at his honesty, but she kept her voice measured, careful not to seem like she was manipulating his doubts. "Every leader makes mistakes sometimes," she said. "What matters most is whether they learn from them, and whether their instincts, over time, lean toward fairness or toward pride." Damien studied her for a long moment, something thoughtful and searching in his gaze. "You've changed since everything happened between us," he said quietly. "I used to think you were simply kind and gentle. Now I see there's real wisdom underneath that kindness. I wonder sometimes if I made a mistake." Elena's chest tightened, old feelings stirring beneath the careful composure she had built over the past weeks. But she did not allow herself to soften too quickly, did not allow old hurt to be forgotten so easily. "You made the choice you believed was right at the time," she said simply. "Only you can decide whether it truly was." She left him standing alone at the training grounds, his expression troubled, and walked back toward the pack house with her pulse still racing from the conversation. She had not lied to him. She had not manipulated him with false sweetness or hidden schemes. She had simply remained honestly herself, patient and clear-eyed, while Vivian's true nature slowly revealed itself through her own choices. The trap, Elena realized, was not something she was actively building with her own hands. It was something Vivian was building for herself, decision by careless decision, and all Elena needed to do was continue being exactly who she already was, patient, honest, and quietly strong, while the pack around her slowly began to see the difference for themselves. That night, writing in her notebook, Elena added a new entry beneath her growing list of observations. "Damien is beginning to see clearly. I do not need to point at Vivian's flaws. I only need to remain steady and let the truth reveal itself in its own time." She closed the notebook, extinguished the light, and allowed herself to hope, carefully and quietly, that perhaps her patience would be rewarded after all, not through cruelty or manipulation, but through the simple, unshakable power of remaining true to herself while everything around her slowly shifted into clearer focus. Vivian noticed the shift before she could name it. Pack members who once greeted her warmly now offered only polite nods, invitations she expected to receive for smaller gatherings among senior council families, quietly stopped arriving. She told herself it meant nothing, that people were simply adjusting to the upcoming wedding, that any coolness she sensed was imagination rather than truth. But late at night, alone in her room, doubt crept in despite her efforts to ignore it. She began watching Elena more closely, searching for some sign of the scheming she half suspected, but could not quite believe her quiet stepsister capable of. She found nothing obvious, only the same calm, steady presence Elena had always shown, now paired with a growing reputation for wisdom and fairness, that Vivian found increasingly difficult to compete against. "You're spending too much time worrying about Elena," Damien told her one evening, when Vivian mentioned her unease. "She's simply trying to move forward with her life. You should focus on our future instead." Vivian forced a smile and let the subject drop, but the unease remained, settling into her chest like a stone she could not quite dislodge. She decided the best solution was to reassert her position more firmly, to remind the pack, and perhaps herself, that she was the one who had won Damien's heart, the one destined to become their Luna. She began planning an elaborate gathering, a formal dinner meant to showcase her leadership abilities before the wedding, inviting not only Blackthorn's senior council members, but representatives from several neighboring packs, including Ridgemont, whose ambitious leadership had been quietly courting Blackthorn's favor since the Hollow Creek dispute had drawn attention to the territory. Elena learned of the gathering through Grace, who mentioned it with a note of concern. "Vivian invited Ridgemont's Alpha personally," Grace said, "without consulting Damien or the council first. It's an unusual move, especially given how delicate relations have been since the border situation." Elena immediately understood the danger. Ridgemont's ambitions were well known, and their sudden interest in cultivating a friendly relationship with Vivian, separate from Damien's official channels, suggested a deeper strategy at play, one that could easily embarrass Blackthorn or create diplomatic complications if handled carelessly. She mentioned her concerns to Marcus during their next meeting, curious whether he had heard anything from his own connections about Ridgemont's intentions. "Ridgemont has been maneuvering for influence along the Northern Territories for years," Marcus confirmed. "If they've identified Vivian as someone eager for status and easily flattered, they may be attempting to build a relationship with Blackthorn's future Luna, independent of Damien himself, someone they believe they can influence more easily than the Alpha." "That's dangerous," Elena said, genuinely troubled now, her concern extending beyond her personal situation with Vivian toward the well-being of the entire pack. If Vivian makes commitments or promises during this dinner, without fully understanding the political implications, it could create serious problems for Blackthorn. "Then perhaps," Marcus said carefully, "it would be wise for someone trustworthy to attend that dinner and pay close attention." Elena had not been invited to the gathering, given her complicated history with both Damien and Vivian, but she realized Marcus was right. Someone needed to observe what happened that evening, someone who understood the political stakes clearly enough to recognize danger if it arose. She spoke with Nathan Pierce, explaining her concerns without revealing the full extent of her sources, and Nathan, sharing her worry, arranged for her to attend as an official observer representing the council's interest in territorial diplomacy, a technical justification that raised few eyebrows given her recent, well-known dedication to studying pack law. The night of the dinner arrived, and Elena entered the grand dining hall dressed elegantly but simply, taking a seat near the edge of the gathering, where she could observe without drawing excessive attention. Vivian, seated beside Damien at the head of the long table, glanced toward Elena with visible surprise and displeasure, though she said nothing, unwilling to create a scene in front of important guests. Ridgemont's Alpha, a smooth, confident wolf named Julian Ashcroft, sat near Vivian, engaging her in easy, flattering conversation throughout the meal. Elena listened carefully, noting how skillfully Julian complimented Vivian's leadership potential, her vision for Blackthorn's future, subtly encouraging her to speak more boldly about decisions that were not truly hers to make. "I've heard wonderful things about your influence within the council," Julian said at one point, his voice warm and admiring. "It's rare to see a future Luna so eager to shape her pack's direction so early." Vivian, flattered and emboldened by the wine and attention, began speaking more freely than she should have. "I believe Blackthorn needs stronger leadership when it comes to territorial matters," she said. "Too much hesitation, Too much concern for sentiment over strategy. I intend to change that once I officially become Luna. Elena's stomach tightened. Damien, seated close enough to hear, frowned slightly, but said nothing immediately, perhaps unwilling to correct Vivian publicly in front of important guests. Julian smiled, clearly pleased with the direction of the conversation. Perhaps, he said carefully, our two packs could establish a more direct understanding, separate from the usual formal channels, given how aligned our visions for regional strength seem to be. It was, Elena recognized immediately, a dangerous invitation, an attempt to establish informal influence over Blackthorn's future leadership through Vivian's eagerness for validation and status, bypassing the careful diplomatic processes Damien had built over years of careful leadership. If Vivian agreed to any such arrangement, even informally, it could create serious complications for Blackthorn's official relationships with other territories. Before Vivian could respond further, Elena spoke up from her seat, her voice calm and measured, cutting gently but firmly into the conversation. Any understanding between our territories would need to go through the official council process, of course, she said, smiling politely toward Julian. Blackthorn values transparency in all its diplomatic relationships. I'm sure Alpha Cross would agree. The table fell briefly silent. Julian's smile flickered, recalculating. Damien, recovering quickly, nodded firmly. Elena is correct. Any formal understanding between Blackthorn and Ridgemont would need council approval. Vivian's face flushed with embarrassment, caught between the awkward silence and the clear correction from both Damien and Elena. Julian, sensing the opportunity had closed, smoothly changed the subject, and the dinner continued with careful, polite conversation for the remainder of the evening. Afterward, as guests began departing, Damien pulled Elena aside briefly. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I don't know what Vivian was thinking, but that could have created real problems for us." "She's still learning," Elena said diplomatically, though privately, she understood the moment revealed something deeper than simple inexperience. Vivian's hunger for admiration and status had nearly led her into a diplomatic misstep with real consequences, purely because a charming stranger had flattered her ambition. Vivian found Elena alone later that night, in the quiet hallway outside the dining hall, her expression a mixture of anger and barely concealed insecurity. "Why were you even there tonight?" she demanded. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." "I was there to help protect Blackthorn's interests," Elena said calmly, "just as I would for any pack matter, regardless of my personal feelings." "You're trying to make me look foolish," Vivian accused, her voice rising slightly. "Ever since the engagement, you've been acting differently, studying pack law, attending meetings, always somehow present at exactly the wrong moment for me." Elena met her stepsister's gaze steadily, refusing to be baited into an argument. "I'm simply trying to be useful to this pack, Vivian. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps it's worth asking yourself why." Vivian's jaw tightened, and for a moment, something raw and uncertain flickered behind her carefully maintained composure, a glimpse of the insecurity Elena suspected had always driven her stepsister's need for control and admiration. But Vivian said nothing further, turning sharply and walking away down the hallway, her footsteps echoing with barely restrained frustration. Elena remained standing alone in the quiet corridor for a long moment afterward, her heart steady despite the tension of the confrontation. She had not sought out the conflict, had not manipulated the evening's events to create embarrassment for her stepsister. She had simply protected her pack's interests, honestly and clearly, exactly as she had promised herself she would. But she understood, walking back to her room that night, that the gathering had shifted something important within the pack's perception of both women. Vivian's carelessness, her eagerness for outside validation, her willingness to speak beyond her authority for the sake of flattery, had been witnessed clearly by Damien and several senior council members. Elena's calm, protective intervention had been witnessed just as clearly. The trap, still built entirely from honest, careful choices rather than manipulation or cruelty, had drawn one step tighter that evening, and Vivian, consumed by anger and wounded pride, still did not understand how thoroughly her own actions were shaping the outcome that awaited her. In the weeks following the dinner with Ridgemont's Alpha, Vivian grew increasingly erratic, though few outside her closest circle noticed the change at first. She began second-guessing every decision, terrified of another public misstep, and that fear pushed her toward controlling behavior that alienated the very people she needed on her side. She snapped at household staff over minor mistakes. She questioned council members' loyalty in private conversations that inevitably reached Grace and Nathan through quiet whispers. She grew possessive of Damien's time, discouraging him from private conversations with anyone she considered a threat, especially Elena. Damien, for his part, grew quieter and more distant, caught between his commitment to the engagement and a growing unease about the woman he had chosen. He began spending more time alone, walking the training grounds late in the evening, or sitting in his study long after the pack house had gone quiet. Elena noticed the change but kept her distance, unwilling to insert herself into his private struggles, understanding that whatever doubts he carried needed to develop naturally, without her influence. It was Grace who first suggested Elena take a more direct role in an upcoming council matter, a decision regarding resource allocation for the pack's smaller, struggling families during the coming winter season. "The council respects your judgment now," Grace said. "Perhaps it's time you had an official voice, rather than simply observing from the sidelines." Elena was surprised, but pleased by the suggestion. She had earned her place through months of careful study and consistent, honest presence within pack affairs, and the idea of formally contributing felt like a natural next step rather than an ambitious reach. She agreed, and within days, Nathan proposed to the council that Elena be granted an advisory seat, given her demonstrated knowledge of pack law and her clear commitment to the pack's well-being. The proposal passed with strong support, though Vivian, present at the meeting as Damien's future Luna, voted against it, her objection thinly veiled as concern about precedent rather than personal rivalry. "We shouldn't be creating new advisory positions so casually," she argued. "It sets an unusual example." Damien, however, supported the proposal firmly. "Elena has proven her value to this council many times over the past months. I see no reason to deny her a formal voice." The vote passed despite Vivian's objection, and Elena found herself, for the first time, sitting at the same table as her stepsister during official pack business, no longer an outside observer, but a recognized voice within Blackthorn's leadership. The resource allocation discussion that followed revealed, once again, the growing contrast between the two women's approaches. Elena advocated carefully for balanced support across all families, drawing on detailed knowledge of each household's specific needs, information she had gathered through months of genuine conversation and listening throughout the territory. Vivian, by contrast, pushed for allocation based primarily on families she considered politically useful or personally connected to her own growing circle of influence. The council, increasingly attentive to fairness after the Hollow Creek situation, sided largely with Elena's balanced approach, further eroding Vivian's standing among senior pack members. Vivian left the meeting visibly frustrated, and that evening, according to household staff who later spoke quietly with Grace, she and Damien argued behind closed doors for the first time since their engagement had been announced. Elena learned of the argument only in vague terms, careful not to seek out details that felt too personal or invasive. But she noticed, over the following days, a subtle shift in Damien's demeanor toward Vivian, a new formality replacing what had once been easy affection, a growing hesitation in his voice whenever he spoke of their upcoming wedding. Vivian, sensing the shift as well, grew desperate to reclaim her footing. She began pursuing more visible acts of leadership, hoping to prove her worth to both Damien and the council. She proposed an ambitious plan to expand Blackthorn's influence over a small stretch of unclaimed territory near the northern border, an area that bordered both Ridgemont and a smaller, weaker pack called Fernwood, home to fewer than 24 families struggling to maintain their independence. "It would strengthen our position significantly," Vivian argued during the council meeting where she presented her proposal. "Fernwood lacks the strength to resist, and claiming that territory would send a clear message to Ridgemont about Blackthorn's continued dominance in the region." Elena felt a familiar unease settle over her as she listened. The proposal, though framed in terms of strategic strength, amounted to little more than taking advantage of a weaker pack's vulnerability, exactly the kind of prideful, careless decision Grace had warned her could create lasting resentment and long-term consequences for Blackthorn's reputation. With respect, Elena said carefully, when given the opportunity to respond, expanding into Fernwood's territory simply because they lack the strength to resist sets a dangerous precedent. It suggests Blackthorn values conquest over fairness, which could damage our relationships with other territories who might fear similar treatment in the future. We're not talking about conquest, Vivian said sharply, clearly irritated by the challenge. We're talking about smart strategic growth. Taking land from a weaker pack simply because we can is conquest, regardless of what we call it, Elena replied evenly, refusing to back down despite Vivian's obvious frustration. Fernwood has done nothing to threaten Blackthorn. If we act against them without genuine cause, we risk becoming exactly the kind of pack our own laws were designed to protect people from. The council chamber grew tense, several members exchanging uncertain glances. Damien, seated at the head of the table, remained quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the competing arguments carefully. I think, he finally said, that Elena raises a valid concern. Blackthorn's strength has always come from fairness and earned respect, not from taking advantage of weaker neighbors. I'm not comfortable moving forward with this proposal. Vivian's face flushed with anger and humiliation, her ambitious plan rejected publicly in front of the entire council. She said nothing further during the meeting, but Elena could feel the weight of her stepsister's resentment simmering just beneath the surface, growing more dangerous with each public setback. After the meeting ended, Vivian approached Elena in the empty hallway, her composure finally cracking under the strain of repeated humiliation. "You're doing this on purpose," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Ever since I won Damien, you've been working to undermine me at every turn." "I've been doing my job on the council," Elena said calmly, refusing to match her stepsister's rising anger. "If that happens to reveal problems with your judgment, that isn't my doing, Vivian. That's simply the truth showing itself." "You think you're so clever," Vivian spat, sitting quietly, playing the wounded victim, while secretly plotting to make me look foolish. "But I know what you're doing, Elena. I see through you." Elena felt a flicker of genuine surprise at her stepsister's accusation, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. Vivian's paranoia, born from her own guilty conscience and growing insecurity, was beginning to twist reality into something resembling the truth, without Vivian fully understanding how close she had actually come to recognizing it. "If you truly believe that," Elena said quietly, "perhaps it's worth asking yourself why my honesty threatens you so deeply." Vivian's eyes flashed with fury, and for a moment, Elena wondered if her stepsister might lash out entirely, abandoning all pretense of composure. But instead, Vivian turned sharply and stormed away, leaving Elena alone in the quiet hallway once again, her heart steady despite the confrontation. That evening, writing in her notebook, Elena reflected carefully on how far things had progressed. Vivian's judgment had been publicly questioned twice now, first regarding the Ridgemont dinner, and now regarding the Fernwood proposal. Damien's trust in her was visibly weakening, replaced by growing doubt and hesitation. The pack's confidence in Elena, meanwhile, continued to strengthen with each careful, honest contribution she made to council matters. But Elena understood that the true test still lay ahead. Small setbacks and growing doubts, while significant, were not yet enough to undo the engagement entirely, or reveal the full truth of how Vivian had originally manipulated her way into Damien's heart through calculated lies. Something larger would need to happen, some undeniable moment, where Vivian's true character became impossible to excuse or explain away. Elena did not know exactly what that moment would look like, only that Vivian's growing desperation and wounded pride made it increasingly likely to arrive soon, born entirely from choices Vivian herself continued to make, unaware that every careless decision was tightening a trap she still could not see. Word of Fernwood's vulnerability had reached Ridgemont as well, and within days of Blackthorn's council rejecting Vivian's expansion proposal, Julian Ashcroft made his own move, sending representatives to Fernwood with an offer of protection in exchange for tribute and loyalty, a clear attempt to absorb the weaker pack's resources and influence under Ridgemont's growing shadow. Fernwood's leader, an aging alpha named Edwin Hollis, sent an urgent message to Blackthorn, requesting an alliance meeting, uncertain whether to trust Ridgemont's offer or seek support elsewhere. Damien called an emergency council session to discuss Blackthorn's response. Vivian, eager to prove herself capable after her recent public setbacks, pushed forcefully for Blackthorn to intervene, framing it now as protection rather than conquest, a subtle shift in her rhetoric that Elena recognized immediately as an attempt to reclaim the same territorial ambitions through more acceptable language. If Ridgemont absorbs Fernwood, they'll control the entire northern border, Vivian argued. We need to offer Fernwood protection ourselves, immediately, before Ridgemont solidifies their position. Elena listened carefully, recognizing genuine strategic concern buried within Vivian's proposal, even if she suspected her stepsister's motivations remained more about proving her own competence than genuine concern for Fernwood's well-being. I agree Fernwood's situation is serious, Elena said. But offering protection needs to be done carefully, through honest negotiation with Edwin Hollis directly, not simply announced as Blackthorn's decision without his full understanding of the terms. Of course we'll negotiate, Vivian said impatiently. But we need to move quickly, before Ridgemont finalizes their own arrangement. Damien considered both perspectives carefully. I'll travel to Fernwood myself, he finally decided, along with a small delegation, to meet with Edwin Hollis directly and understand exactly what kind of support he needs and what he's willing to offer in exchange. This isn't a decision to make from a distance. Vivian immediately volunteered to join the delegation, eager for the opportunity to demonstrate her leadership abilities directly. Damien hesitated for a moment before agreeing, and to Elena's surprise, he also asked her to join the delegation, given her demonstrated understanding of pack law and her careful, thoughtful approach to complex negotiations. I want balanced perspectives with me on this, Damien explained to the council. This decision will shape Blackthorn's relationship with our northern neighbors for years to come. The delegation departed for Fernwood 3 days later, traveling through dense forest territory that marked the natural boundary between the three packs. Elena rode near the back of the group, observing quietly as Vivian rode close beside Damien, clearly eager to project confidence and capability throughout the journey. They arrived at Fernwood's modest territory by early evening, greeted by Edwin Hollis himself, an elderly wolf with tired eyes and a visible weariness that spoke of years spent struggling to protect his small, vulnerable pack. He led them to a simple meeting hall, far less grand than Blackthorn's great chamber, where Fernwood's remaining council members, barely a handful of aging wolves and a few younger representatives, waited anxiously. Ridgemont's offer sounds generous on the surface, Edwin explained, his voice heavy with concern, but I don't trust Julian Ashcroft's intentions. Once we depend on his protection, I fear we'll lose our independence entirely, becoming little more than a resource for his own ambitions. What kind of support are you hoping Blackthorn might offer instead? Damien asked carefully. Edwin hesitated, glancing toward his younger council members before answering honestly. We need protection from potential aggression, yes, but more than that, we need trade support. Our hunting grounds have grown scarce in recent years, and our young wolves have few opportunities beyond simple survival. We don't want charity, Alpha Cross. We want partnership, something that respects our independence while still offering genuine support. Vivian spoke up immediately, her tone confident and decisive. Blackthorn can offer that. We'll establish a formal protection agreement, and in exchange, Fernwood will provide loyalty and resources to Blackthorn's broader territorial strength. Elena noticed Edwin's expression shift subtly, a flicker of the same wariness he had described feeling toward Ridgemont's offer. Vivian's proposal, though framed as partnership, still centered Blackthorn's benefit above Fernwood's genuine needs, echoing the exact pattern Edwin feared from Ridgemont. Perhaps, Elena said gently, before the conversation could move further in that direction, instead of framing this as loyalty and resources flowing toward Blackthorn, we could discuss what genuine partnership looks like from Fernwood's perspective first. What would truly help your pack thrive, not just survive? Edwin's expression softened with visible relief, and he began speaking more openly, describing specific challenges his pack faced, struggling hunting grounds that could benefit from shared access to Blackthorn's more abundant territory, young wolves eager for training opportunities that Fernwood's small population could not provide alone, trade relationships that could strengthen both packs without requiring Fernwood to surrender its independence entirely. Damien listened closely, and as the conversation continued late into the evening, a genuine framework began taking shape, one built on mutual benefit rather than dominance, careful reciprocity rather than simple absorption of a weaker pack's resources. Vivian grew increasingly quiet as the discussion shifted away from her original proposal, her earlier confidence fading into visible discomfort as she realized her approach had been gently but firmly redirected by Elena's careful, empathetic questioning. By the time the delegation retired for the evening, staying in modest guest quarters provided by Fernwood's hospitality, a genuine agreement had begun forming, one that honored Edwin's request for true partnership rather than disguised control. Damien thanked Elena privately before retiring, his expression thoughtful and warm. "You have a gift for finding the honest path forward in difficult situations," he said quietly. "I don't think tonight would have gone nearly as well without your perspective." "I simply asked the right questions," Elena said modestly. Edwin already knew what his pack needed. He just needed someone willing to listen. Damien studied her for a long moment, something tender and searching in his gaze. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said, his voice quieter now, more personal. "About choices I made, and whether they were truly the right ones." Elena's heart quickened, though she kept her expression carefully composed. "Choices are only mistakes if we refuse to learn from them," she said gently. "What matters most is what we do moving forward." Damien nodded slowly, though he said nothing further, and Elena retired to her own quarters that night, with her thoughts racing, torn between old feelings resurfacing and careful awareness that nothing had truly been resolved yet. Not the deeper truth of Vivian's original deception, not the growing doubt within Damien's heart, not the trap still quietly closing around her stepsister's unraveling composure. The following morning, as the delegation prepared to depart, Vivian sought Elena out privately, her expression a complicated mixture of anger and something closer to desperation. "You made me look foolish again," she said, her voice tight, with barely controlled emotion. "In front of Damien, in front of Edwin, in front of everyone." "I didn't make you look like anything, Vivian," Elena said honestly. "I simply tried to help Fernwood get what they actually needed, rather than what would make Blackthorn look strongest." "That's exactly the problem," Vivian snapped. "You always manage to seem so wise, so selfless, while I end up looking selfish and short-sighted. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is, constantly being compared to you?" Elena studied her stepsister carefully, noticing genuine exhaustion beneath the anger, the visible toll of weeks spent struggling to maintain a position she had won through deception rather than earned through genuine understanding and care. For a brief moment, something like pity stirred within Elena's chest, quickly followed by the sobering reminder of exactly how Vivian had claimed her position in the first place. "Perhaps," Elena said quietly, "the exhaustion comes from trying to be someone you're not, rather than from any comparison to me." Vivian's eyes widened slightly, something flickering behind her anger that looked almost like recognition, quickly buried beneath renewed defensiveness. "You don't know anything about who I am," she said sharply, before turning and walking away toward the waiting horses, leaving Elena alone once again with her own complicated thoughts. As the delegation began its journey back toward Blackthorn, Elena reflected on how close Vivian had come, in that brief unguarded moment, to acknowledging some deeper truth about her own choices and character. The trap, still built entirely from honest actions and careful patience, was drawing steadily closer to its natural conclusion, and Elena sensed, with growing certainty, that the final unraveling would not be far off now. The Fernwood Partnership Agreement was finalized within 2 weeks, formally announced before the full Blackthorn Council to widespread approval. Edwin Hollis himself traveled to Blackthorn for the signing ceremony, publicly praising Damien's leadership and, notably, thanking Elena directly for her thoughtful guidance during the negotiations, a public acknowledgement that further strengthened her growing standing within the pack. Vivian stood beside Damien throughout the ceremony, smiling for the assembled crowd, but Elena could see the tension held tightly behind her practiced expression. The wedding, now only 3 weeks away, loomed over everything, and Vivian seemed increasingly desperate to reclaim the confident, celebrated position she had once held before her judgment began facing repeated public challenges. That desperation led her toward a decision that would ultimately prove far more consequential than any territorial dispute. Vivian began quietly reaching out to contacts within Ridgemont, hoping to secure a private advantage that would restore her standing before the wedding, something impressive enough to silence the growing doubts she sensed building around her. She did not tell Damien about these conversations. She met privately with a Ridgemont representative, a smooth-talking wolf named Julian's cousin, offering select information about Blackthorn's internal council discussions in exchange for Ridgemont's public support of her leadership once she officially became Luna, support that would help solidify her position and silence critics within Blackthorn, who increasingly favored Elena's judgment over her own. Elena learned of these secret meetings through Marcus, whose network of contacts throughout the Northern Territories remained sharp and reliable. "Your stepsister has been meeting privately with Ridgemont representatives," Marcus told her during one of their regular meetings, sharing information about Blackthorn's council discussions in exchange for future political support. Elena felt a cold chill settle through her chest. This was different from careless judgment or wounded pride. This was betrayal, a deliberate compromise of pack security and trust for the sake of personal ambition. "Do you know what specific information she's shared?" Elena asked. "Details about the Fernwood Agreement's specific terms before they were publicly announced," Marcus said. "Internal council opinions about Ridgemont's territorial ambitions. Enough to give Ridgemont a real advantage in future negotiations with Blackthorn." Elena's mind raced, weighing the gravity of what she had just learned against her promise to herself never to manipulate or fabricate anything to bring down her stepsister. This information, if true, was not something she needed to create or exaggerate. It was a genuine, serious betrayal of pack trust. Exactly the kind of undeniable truth she had been patiently waiting to emerge. "I need proof," Elena said carefully. "Something undeniable, not just secondhand information, or Vivian will simply deny everything and claim I'm fabricating accusations out of jealousy." Marcus nodded slowly. "I may be able to help with that. My contact within Ridgemont has grown uncomfortable with how deeply Julian's cousin is manipulating your stepsister. He might be willing to provide documentation, if approached carefully." Over the following days, Marcus worked quietly through his network, and Elena continued her normal routine within Blackthorn, careful not to reveal any hint of what she had learned. She attended council meetings, contributed thoughtfully to ongoing pack business, and maintained polite, careful distance from Vivian, giving no indication that anything had changed. Damien, meanwhile, continued growing more distant from his fiancée, though he had not yet articulated the full depth of his doubts, even to himself. He sought Elena out more frequently for quiet conversations about pack matters, conversations that gradually began touching on more personal subjects as well, old memories, shared history, careful acknowledgments of feelings neither of them fully voiced but both increasingly recognized. "I keep thinking about how things used to be," Damien admitted one evening, as they walked together along the edge of the training grounds, "before everything became so complicated." "Things can't simply return to how they were," Elena said honestly. "Too much has happened. But that doesn't mean something new isn't possible, built on clearer understanding." Damien studied her carefully, something hopeful and uncertain in his expression. "Do you think there's a path back to something real between us, Elena? Or am I simply holding on to something already lost?" Elena's heart ached with the honesty of his question, old feelings resurfacing powerfully, despite her careful efforts to remain guarded. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I know I won't pretend the past few months didn't happen, or that trust can be rebuilt without real honesty first." Damien nodded slowly, accepting her careful honesty without pushing further, and they continued walking in comfortable silence, both aware that something significant was shifting between them, even if neither fully understood yet where it would lead. 5 days later, Marcus contacted Elena urgently, requesting an immediate meeting. When she arrived at their usual quiet inn, his expression was serious, and he handed her a small collection of documents, copies of messages exchanged between Vivian and Ridgemont's representative, detailing exactly what information had been shared and what promises of future political support had been offered in exchange. Elena read through the documents carefully, her hands steady despite the weight of what she now held, undeniable proof of her stepsister's betrayal of pack trust. "This is enough," she said quietly. "This is more than enough." "What will you do with it?" Marcus asked. Elena considered the question carefully. She had promised herself, from the very beginning, that she would not seek destruction for its own sake, that any consequences Vivian faced would come from the undeniable truth of her own actions, revealed clearly and fairly, rather than through manipulation or cruelty. This evidence, gathered honestly through Marcus's own grievances against Ridgemont, rather than any scheme of Elena's making, represented exactly the kind of clear truth she had been patiently waiting for. "I'll bring it to the council," Elena said finally, openly, honestly, with full documentation. "Vivian deserves the chance to explain herself, but the pack deserves to know the truth about who they're trusting with their future." She returned to Blackthorn that evening with the documents carefully secured, her heart heavy with the weight of what was coming. Despite everything Vivian had done, despite the humiliation and betrayal Elena had endured, some part of her still felt the complicated grief of watching her stepsister's carefully built world begin its final collapse, not through cruelty, but through the simple, unavoidable consequences of her own choices. That night, writing in her notebook one final time before the truth would finally be revealed, Elena considered everything that had led to this moment. Months of patience, careful study, honest contribution to pack matters, and the slow, natural unraveling of a deception built on lies from the very beginning. She closed the notebook and looked out over the quiet Blackthorn territory, the same land she had once imagined ruling beside Damien, the same land Vivian had tried to claim through manipulation rather than genuine care. Tomorrow, she would bring the truth before the council. Tomorrow, the trap she had never actively built, only patiently allowed to reveal itself, would finally close completely around the stepsister who had never understood the difference between winning and truly earning what she claimed to want. Elena requested an emergency council session the following morning, explaining only that she had discovered information affecting Blackthorn's security that required immediate attention. Nathan, sensing the gravity in her voice, arranged the meeting quickly, and by midday, the full council had gathered in the great chamber, including Damien and Vivian, both unaware of exactly what Elena intended to present. Elena stood before the assembled council, the documents held carefully in her hands, her heart steady despite the enormity of the moment. She had rehearsed nothing dramatic, no accusatory speech designed to maximize humiliation. She simply intended to present the truth clearly, and let the evidence speak for itself. 3 days ago, Elena began, I received information suggesting that confidential council discussions had been shared with representatives from Ridgemont, information that could seriously compromise Blackthorn's negotiating position on several ongoing matters, including our new partnership with Fernwood. The chamber grew tense, murmurs rippling through the assembled council members. Damien's expression sharpened with immediate concern. "Who shared this information?" he asked. Elena hesitated only briefly before answering clearly. According to documented communications, the information was shared by Vivian in exchange for future political support from Ridgemont regarding her position as Blackthorn's Luna. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Vivian's face drained of color, her earlier composure shattering entirely as every eye in the room turned toward her. "That's a lie," Vivian said, her voice sharp with panic. "I don't know what she's talking about. This is exactly the kind of manipulation I warned everyone about." "I have documentation," Elena said calmly, stepping forward and placing the copied messages on the council table for Nathan and Grace to examine. Messages between Vivian and a Ridgemont representative detailing specific information shared about the Fernwood negotiations before they were publicly announced, along with explicit discussion of political support promised in exchange. Nathan and Grace examined the documents carefully, their expressions growing increasingly grave as they read through the detailed exchanges. Damien moved closer, reading over their shoulders, his jaw tightening with each line. "Vivian," he said, his voice low and controlled despite the visible tension in his frame. "Is this true?" "It's fabricated," Vivian insisted, though her voice trembled now, the confidence she had relied on for months finally beginning to crack under the weight of undeniable evidence. "Elena has been trying to undermine me since the day you chose me over her." This is just her final attempt to destroy what we have. Elena remained calm, refusing to be baited into an emotional exchange that would distract from the evidence itself. The messages include specific details only someone with direct access to our private council discussions could have known, she said. Details about the Fernwood Agreement's exact terms, discussed only within this chamber, before the public announcement. If this is fabricated, I invite the council to investigate the matter fully and verify the authenticity of these documents through whatever means they consider appropriate. Grace looked up from the documents, her expression heavy with disappointment. The details here are remarkably specific, she said quietly. Things that were only discussed in this room, among council members, before the Fernwood signing ceremony. Damien turned toward Vivian, his expression a complicated mixture of anger, betrayal, and something close to genuine grief. How could you do this? He asked quietly. After everything, after the trust I placed in you, you shared confidential PAC information for your own political advantage. Vivian's composure finally collapsed entirely. Tears filled her eyes, though whether from genuine remorse or simple panic at being caught, Elena could not fully determine. I only wanted people to respect me, Vivian said, her voice breaking. Everyone kept comparing me to Elena, kept doubting my judgment. I just wanted something that would prove I deserved to be here. By betraying the very pack you claim to want to lead, Damien asked, his voice hardening with each word. By compromising our security and our relationships with other territories, all so you could win some private political favor from Ridgemont. Vivian had no answer that could soften the truth laid bare before the entire council. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been, filled with the collective recognition of exactly what her choices had revealed about her true character. Nathan spoke first, his voice grave but steady. This is a serious violation of PAC trust and security. According to Blackthorn law, sharing confidential council information with a rival territory for personal gain constitutes grounds for immediate removal from any position of leadership or influence within the PAC. Damien nodded slowly, his expression heavy with the weight of the decision he now faced. I need time to fully process this, he said, but I cannot, in good conscience, continue forward with our engagement, knowing what I now know about your judgment and your priorities, Vivian. Vivian's tears fell freely now, genuine desperation replacing her earlier attempts at denial. Damien, please, she said, I made a mistake, but I love you. Doesn't that count for something? Love isn't just words, Vivian, Damien said quietly. It's trust, and honesty, and choosing the well-being of the people you claim to love over your own ambition. You compromised this entire PAC's security for your own political advantage. That isn't love. That's exactly the kind of selfish ambition Elena warned this council about, again and again, while you dismissed her concerns as jealousy. The council chamber remained silent, every member absorbing the full weight of the moment, watching as months of careful, honest patience finally revealed the truth that had been building steadily beneath the surface of Blackthorn's daily life. Elena said nothing further, standing quietly as the council began discussing the formal consequences Vivian would face, the immediate revocation of her position as future Luna, the careful review of any additional PAC information she might have shared, and the broader question of whether she could remain within Blackthorn's territory at all, given the severity of her betrayal. Vivian was eventually escorted from the chamber, her earlier confidence completely shattered, replaced by the raw, exposed grief of someone finally confronted with the full consequences of choices built entirely on ambition rather than genuine care. Elena watched her go, feeling a complicated mixture of relief, sorrow, and quiet vindication, emotions too tangled to fully separate from one another in that heavy, exhausted moment. Damien remained in the chamber long after the council session ended, sitting quietly at the head of the table, his expression distant and troubled. Elena approached him carefully, uncertain what to say after everything that had just unfolded. I'm sorry, she said finally, though she was not entirely certain what she was apologizing for, the truth itself, or the pain it had caused him, despite everything Vivian had done. Damien looked up at her, something raw and searching in his tired eyes. You tried to warn me, in your own careful way, without ever accusing her outright. I should have listened more closely, months ago. You made the choice you believed was right at the time, Elena said gently, echoing words she had once offered him during an earlier, quieter conversation. What matters now is what you choose moving forward. Damien nodded slowly, though he said nothing further that evening, the weight of betrayal and heartbreak still too heavy for easy conversation. Elena left him alone in the quiet chamber, understanding that whatever came next would require time, patience, and careful honesty to fully rebuild, both for Damien's broken trust and for her own complicated feelings about everything that had finally come to light. Walking back toward her room that night, Elena felt the full weight of months of careful patience finally settling into something resembling closure, though she understood clearly that the true ending of this story, whatever shape it would eventually take, had not yet fully arrived. In the days following the council session, Blackthorn settled into an uneasy quiet. Vivian remained confined to a guest wing of the pack house under careful watch, while the council determined the full extent of her actions and the appropriate consequences under pack law. She was permitted no further involvement in council matters, no contact with other territories, and only limited, supervised communication with her mother Diane, who arrived at the pack house within days of the revelation, her face pale with shock and disbelief. Elena's father, Richard, sought Elena out during this difficult time, his expression heavy with complicated emotion. "Diane is devastated," he said quietly. "She had no idea Vivian was capable of something like this." "I believe that," Elena said honestly. "Vivian was always careful about what she revealed to her mother. I don't think Diane ever truly understood who Vivian really was, underneath the charm." Richard studied his daughter carefully, something like quiet pride mixing with lingering concern in his expression. "You handled all of this with remarkable grace, Elena. I know these past months haven't been easy for you." "They weren't," Elena admitted. "But I think I needed this time to understand my own strength, separate from anyone else's choices about me." Richard nodded slowly, pulling his daughter into a gentle embrace, before leaving her to continue processing everything that had happened. Elena appreciated his quiet support, though she understood that the coming days would still require careful navigation, both regarding Vivian's formal consequences and regarding her own complicated, still unresolved feelings toward Damien. Vivian requested a private meeting with Elena 3 days after the council session, a request Elena considered carefully before finally agreeing, curious what her stepsister might want to say, now that the careful mask of manipulation had been stripped away entirely. They met in a small sitting room, Vivian looking noticeably diminished, her usual polished confidence replaced by visible exhaustion and raw vulnerability. "I wanted to talk to you," Vivian said quietly, "before the council finalizes my punishment. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say some things honestly, for once." Elena remained quiet, waiting, giving her stepsister space to speak without interruption. "I was jealous of you," Vivian admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "For years, honestly, long before Damien. You always seemed so certain of who you were, so comfortable being kind without needing anyone's approval. I never felt that way about myself. I always needed people to notice me, to validate me, and when I saw how much Damien cared for you, I convinced myself that if I could take that away from you, I would finally feel like I mattered as much as you always seemed to." Elena listened carefully, feeling a complicated mixture of sympathy and continued clarity about the real harm Vivian's choices had caused, regardless of the insecurity that may have driven them. "Jealousy doesn't excuse what you did, Vivian," she said gently but firmly. "Lying to Damien, manipulating your way into his trust, and then betraying pack security once you had it, those were choices, not simply consequences of feeling insecure." "I know," Vivian said, tears filling her eyes again. "I'm not trying to excuse it. I just wanted you to understand where it came from, even if that doesn't make it right." Elena considered her stepsister's words carefully, recognizing genuine pain beneath the admission, even as she remained clear-eyed about the real consequences Vivian's choices had caused for the pack, for Damien, and for Elena herself. "I hope," Elena said finally, "that whatever consequences the council decides are right, you use this time to actually understand yourself, rather than simply regretting getting caught." Vivian nodded slowly, wiping at her tears. "I'm sorry, Elena. Genuinely. I don't expect you to believe that easily, but it's true. Elena did not offer immediate forgiveness, understanding that trust, once broken so completely, required more than a single tearful conversation to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. But she nodded quietly, acknowledging her stepsister's words without erasing the real harm they represented. I hope you find a way to build something honest for yourself, Vivian, wherever that path leads you from here. The council finalized its decision within the week. Vivian would be formally stripped of any claim to leadership or influence within Blackthorn, required to leave the territory entirely, though allowed to depart peacefully rather than facing more severe punishment, given the absence of any physical harm caused by her actions. Diane chose to accompany her daughter, unwilling to abandon her despite the pain and disappointment she carried, and within days, both women departed Blackthorn territory for a distant relative's home in a neighboring region, beginning a quieter, more uncertain chapter far from the influence and status Vivian had once so desperately craved. Elena watched their departure from a distance, feeling the complicated weight of an ending that brought relief without triumph, closure without simple celebration. She understood, more clearly than ever, that real strength came not from watching someone else's downfall, but from the quiet, patient integrity she had maintained throughout the entire difficult journey. Damien sought her out that same evening, finding her in the garden where she had first learned, months earlier, of Vivian's original betrayal. He looked lighter somehow, though still carrying visible weariness from everything the pack had endured. "It's strange," he said, sitting beside her on the garden bench. "After everything, I feel more like myself again than I have in months." "Deception has a way of clouding everything it touches," Elena said quietly, "even things that seem unrelated at first." Damien nodded, studying her carefully in the fading evening light. "I owe you an apology, Elena. A real one, not just gratitude for exposing the truth. I chose Vivian over you based on lies, without giving you the chance to defend yourself, without trusting the years of honest history we shared together. That was wrong, regardless of how convincingly she manipulated the situation." Elena considered his words carefully, old hurt and complicated hope tangled together within her chest. "I forgive you," she said finally, meaning it fully. "Not because what happened didn't hurt, but because I understand now that you were deceived just as thoroughly as I was hurt by that deception. We were both victims of her manipulation, in different ways." Damien reached for her hand gently, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had not seen from him in months. "I don't want to rush anything," he said carefully. "I know trust needs to be rebuilt slowly, honestly, without either of us pretending the past few months didn't happen. But I want that chance, Elena, if you're willing to give it." Elena studied him carefully, feeling the weight of months of careful patience, honest integrity, and quiet strength finally arriving at a moment she had once feared might never come. She did not answer immediately, understanding the importance of taking this new possibility as seriously and thoughtfully as she had taken everything else throughout this long, difficult journey. "I'm willing," she said finally, "to build something new, slowly and honestly. If you're willing to earn that trust the same patient way I've tried to earn everything else these past months." Damien smiled, genuine warmth returning to his tired eyes for the first time, in what felt like a very long while. "That sounds exactly right," he said quietly. They sat together in the quiet garden as evening settled fully over Blackthorn territory, neither rushing toward easy reconciliation, both understanding that whatever came next would need to be built carefully, honestly, and patiently, exactly as Elena had built everything else throughout the long months since her original humiliation in the Great Hall. The trap she had never actively constructed, only patiently allowed the truth to build on its own, had finally closed completely, not through cruelty or manipulation, but through unwavering honesty, careful strength, and the simple, powerful belief that real integrity always outlasts any deception built to replace it. 6 months passed before Blackthorn territory fully settled into its new rhythm, the memory of Vivian's betrayal fading slowly into the pack's broader history. Another cautionary story eventually added to Grace's careful collection of lessons about trust and leadership. Elena's advisory seat on the council became permanent, her contributions increasingly central to pack decisions. her reputation for fairness and wisdom now firmly established throughout Blackthorn, and, increasingly, among neighboring territories as well. Fernwood's partnership with Blackthorn continued strengthening, Edwin Hollis becoming a genuine ally rather than simply a grateful recipient of protection, exactly the kind of honest, mutually respectful relationship Elena had hoped to build during those difficult early negotiations. Ridgemont, meanwhile, faced growing scrutiny from other territories after word spread of Julian's cousin's role in manipulating Vivian's insecurity for political advantage, damaging Ridgemont's broader reputation for honest dealing, and forcing Julian himself to spend considerable effort repairing relationships he had carelessly jeopardized. Marcus remained a valuable ally throughout this period, his own grievances against Damien gradually softening as he witnessed the genuine growth and integrity Damien demonstrated in the aftermath of Vivian's betrayal. Their alliance, born from mutual distrust and separate grievances, evolved slowly into something resembling genuine respect, and Marcus became an occasional advisor to Blackthorn's council on matters involving neighboring territories, his sharp insight proving valuable now that it was no longer aimed purely at old resentments. Damien and Elena's relationship rebuilt itself carefully, exactly as they had promised each other in the quiet garden that evening. They spent months simply talking, honestly and openly, working through old hurts and lingering doubts, rebuilding trust through consistent, patient honesty, rather than rushing back into the easy comfort they had once shared before everything fell apart. Damien made a point of including Elena's perspective in every significant pact decision, not out of guilt or obligation, but because he had come to genuinely value the clarity and wisdom she brought to every situation. "I used to think leadership meant having all the answers," Damien admitted to her one evening, as they walked together along the same training grounds where he had once confessed his growing doubts about Vivian. "Now I understand it means surrounding yourself with people who care enough to tell you the truth, even when it's difficult to hear." Elena smiled, reaching for his hand naturally, comfortably, in a way that felt entirely different from the careful distance they had maintained during those difficult months of rebuilding. "That's exactly what I learned too," she said. "Real strength was never about proving myself right or watching someone else fail. It was simply about staying true to who I am, no matter how difficult that became." Their wedding, when it finally arrived nearly a year after the original engagement announcement that had once shattered Elena's world, was a quiet, honest celebration, far different from the elaborate spectacle Vivian had once planned. Grace stood as a witness, having become something like a mentor and dear friend throughout Elena's transformation, from heartbroken stepsister to trusted council advisor. Nathan and the other senior council members attended with genuine warmth, celebrating not simply a romantic reunion, but the return of stability and honest leadership to Blackthorn's future. Richard walked his daughter down the aisle with visible pride, and even Diane, who maintained careful, distant contact with Elena following Vivian's departure, sent a simple, heartfelt letter of congratulations, expressing genuine hope that Elena had found the happiness she deserved after everything she had endured. Of Vivian herself, only occasional news reached Blackthorn over the following months, quiet reports of a woman living modestly in a distant territory, slowly, painfully rebuilding a life without the status and admiration she had once so desperately craved. Elena felt no satisfaction in these distant reports, only a quiet, complicated hope that her stepsister might eventually find the genuine self-understanding that had always eluded her during her time within Blackthorn's borders. As Elena stood beside Damien on their wedding day, surrounded by the pack she had grown to genuinely serve and love throughout her long, patient journey, she reflected on everything the past year had taught her. She had never sought cruelty or manipulation to reclaim what Vivian had stolen from her. She had simply remained steady, patient, and honest, trusting that real character eventually reveals itself clearly, without needing to be forced or fabricated. The trap she had never actively built had closed entirely on its own, constructed not from lies or schemes, but from Vivian's own choices, her own ambition, her own inability to understand that real trust and real leadership could never be stolen, only earned through genuine care and honest integrity. Elena looked out at the assembled pack, at Damien's warm, steady presence beside her, at Grace and Nathan and Marcus and her father, all gathered to celebrate not simply a wedding, but the return of genuine trust and stability to the territory she called home. She thought of the frightened, humiliated girl who had once stood silently in the great hall, absorbing public shame without protest, and she felt a deep, quiet gratitude for the patient, difficult journey that had transformed that pain into genuine strength. She had not needed cruelty to win. She had only needed patience, honesty, and the unshakable belief that real integrity always outlasts any deception built to replace it. As the ceremony concluded and the pack erupted into genuine, joyful celebration around her, Elena Marsh finally allowed herself to fully release the careful guard she had maintained for so long, stepping fully into the life she had quietly, patiently earned, not through her stepsister's downfall, but through her own unwavering commitment to the truth. The sun set gently over Blackthorn territory that evening, casting warm golden light across the celebrating pack, and Elena, standing beside the alpha she had loved honestly from the very beginning, understood at last that some victories require no trap at all, only the patient, unshakable courage to remain exactly who you truly are, no matter how long the world takes to finally see it clearly.